The way you speak right now, the pauses, the moments where you reach for a word that does not come immediately, the slight hesitation in the middle of a sentence, may be telling you something about your brain that no blood test has caught yet. Researchers just published a finding that changes the way we think about early dementia detection. They discovered that everyday speech patterns are directly tied to executive function, the cognitive command center of the brain. And the changes in those patterns that predict early cognitive decline can appear years before any other symptom shows up on a standard memory test. Years, not months. Years of warning that most people miss entirely because nobody told them what to listen for. Here is the loop I am opening right now. Because there are 5 specific speech changes that the research identifies as meaningful early signals. Most people dismiss every single one of them as normal aging or tiredness or just a bad day. I am going to tell you all 5. But the 5th one, the one that showed the strongest predictive association with cognitive decline in the study, is not what you expect. And I'm not giving it to you until we have built the context that makes it land properly. By the end of this video, you are going to understand exactly what executive function is and why it shows up in your speech before anywhere else. You are going to know the 5 speech patterns to pay attention to in yourself and in the people you love. And you are going to have a clear, actionable set of steps to take right now. Not someday, not after a diagnosis, right now, to protect the brain systems that speech is measuring. If you have ever paused mid-sentence and felt a flicker of worry about what that meant, this video was made for you. I want to tell you about a family I know. A woman I will call Patricia brought her husband Robert in to see me. Robert was 74, former lawyer, brilliant man, still sharp in most ways. But Patricia had noticed something over the previous 18 months that she could not fully articulate. She said he just seems to search more for words, for the thread of a conversation. He will be telling a story and then just pause and look at me, and I can see him trying to find where he was. Robert told me he felt fine. He passed his standard cognitive screening. His scores were normal for his age. I should have sent him home reassured, but Patricia's observation was too specific to dismiss. The word searching, the mid-sentence pauses, the thread of the conversation going quiet in a way it never used to. I referred Robert to a specialist colleague who conducted a more detailed linguistic analysis, a relatively new assessment tool that examines speech patterns specifically for the markers the latest research has identified. The results showed early subclinical changes in verbal fluency and processing speed that the standard screening had completely missed. We caught it early. Robert began a structured cognitive intervention program and dietary protocol. 2 years later, he is still practicing, still sharp in conversation, still telling his stories. But I have thought about Patricia's description many times since. Because what she noticed before any test confirmed it was real. She noticed the speech, and she was right to. What you are about to learn is how to notice the same things she did, and what to do when you do. Let us build the foundation. Because to understand why speech patterns reveal cognitive change so early, you need to understand what executive function actually is and why it is so deeply connected to how we speak. Executive function is not one thing. It is a collection of high-level cognitive processes that the prefrontal cortex, the front portion of the brain, coordinates and manages. It includes working memory, which is the ability to hold information in mind while using it. Processing speed, which is how quickly the brain retrieves and assembles information. Cognitive flexibility, which is the ability to shift between ideas fluidly. And inhibitory control, which is the ability to suppress irrelevant information and stay focused on what you intend to say. Every single sentence you speak draws on all 4 of these simultaneously. You reach into your memory for the word. You process it at speed. You hold the beginning of the sentence in working memory while constructing the end of it. You suppress the other words that are close but not quite right. When any of these systems begins to show early strain, even subtle strain, years before clinical decline, it shows up in speech first. Before memory tests catch it, before imaging catches it, before the person themselves is fully aware of it. Speech is a window into executive function because it is the most cognitively demanding thing most people do casually every day without realizing how much processing it requires. Here is the counterintuitive truth at the heart of this research. The occasional senior moment, forgetting where you put your keys, is not what the research is measuring. That kind of memory lapse is common, often benign, and not reliably predictive of dementia. What the research measures is something subtler and more consistent, not what you forget. How you speak when you remember. Before we go into the 5 speech patterns themselves, I want to ask you something, and I want a real answer in the comments because this community matters to me. Which one of these describes you more honestly? Are you someone who has noticed changes in your own speech or word finding in the last year or two and wondered what they meant? Or are you someone who has noticed these changes in someone you love, a parent, a spouse, a friend, and is watching carefully but not sure when to act? Option A, you have noticed it in yourself. Option B, you have noticed it in someone you love. Tell me below, because both groups need different things from this channel, and I want to serve both of them well. Now, the 5 speech patterns the research identifies as early signals worth paying attention to. Pattern 1. Increased filler words and sounds. Everyone uses filler words. The occasional pause filler is a completely normal feature of spontaneous speech. The research is not measuring whether you use them. It is measuring whether the frequency has changed. When executive function begins to show early strain, the brain's word retrieval process takes slightly longer. Processing speed slows by a fraction. The mouth, which has been running ahead of conscious thought your whole life, hits a gap. The filler fills it. The key signal is not whether you say, it is whether the people who know you best notice you are saying it significantly more than you used to. Not once in a while. Consistently. In conversations where you used to be fluent without effort. For those monitoring this in themselves, the most useful exercise is recording a voice memo of yourself telling a familiar story, something you have told dozens of times, and listening back. If you are surprised by the frequency of filler sounds in a story that should flow from memory, it is worth noting. For those monitoring it in someone they love, the key is comparison over time, not a single conversation. A trend across many conversations over months. Real implication. Increased filler frequency in the research predicted declining verbal processing speed 18 to 24 months before standard cognitive testing showed any change. That is your early warning window. Pattern 2. Word-finding pauses in the middle of sentences. This is different from forgetting a proper noun, a name, a place, a movie title. Those tip-of-the-tongue moments are extremely common and generally benign. The research identifies a more specific pattern. Pausing mid-sentence while searching for a common word. A word you have used thousands of times. Something simple, an everyday object, a basic action. The pause is not the same as thinking carefully. It has a different quality, a slightly blank quality, a reaching quality. People who experience it often describe it as the word being just out of reach, right there, but not quite accessible. This happens because the lexical retrieval system, the brain's word-finding mechanism, is one of the earliest cognitive processes affected by the subclinical changes that precede dementia. Specifically, the speed of retrieval slows. The word is still stored. It is not lost, but the pathway to it takes longer to activate. For beginners, the distinction that matters is frequency and context. Occasional word-finding pauses in fatigue or distraction are not significant. Consistent word-finding pauses for common everyday words in normal alert conversation are worth tracking. For those more advanced in their understanding, specific word categories matter. The research found that the most sensitive early indicator is difficulty with action words, verbs, rather than nouns. Struggling to find the right verb in a sentence is a more specific early signal than struggling to find a noun, because verb retrieval draws more heavily on the prefrontal cortex systems that decline earliest. Real implication. Participants with frequent mid-sentence pauses on common verbs showed measurable differences in prefrontal cortex activation on imaging studies, even when their overall cognitive scores remained within normal range. We are at the midpoint of this video, and I want to remind you of the loop we opened at the beginning. The 5th speech pattern, the one that showed the strongest predictive association with early cognitive decline. I am coming to it. Everything I am telling you now is the context that makes it make complete sense. And before I get to pattern 5, I want to mention something I am building for this community. A practical resource that combines the warning signs we are discussing today with the specific interventions the research supports, diet, sleep, exercise, and cognitive training, into a structured daily protocol designed for seniors. Subscribe so you are here when that drops, because it is being built specifically for this audience. Pattern 3. Losing the thread of a story. This is the pattern Patricia described in Robert. And it is more specific than it sounds. Everyone has told a story and lost their place. Distraction, interruption, fatigue. These are common and not meaningful on their own. The pattern the research identifies is different. It is the experience of being mid-story, telling something you know well, something you have told before, something emotionally familiar, and finding that the next part simply is not there in the order you expected it to be. The working memory system that holds the architecture of a narrative, where you are in the sequence, what comes next, how the ending connects to the beginning, is one of the most executive function-dependent cognitive tasks humans perform routinely. When working memory begins to show early strain, narrative structure is one of the first places it appears. For beginners, the signal to watch for is this: not forgetting isolated facts within a story, losing the scaffolding of the story itself, the sense of where you are in it, the through line from beginning to end. For those monitoring a loved one, the pattern Robert showed, the reaching look, the visible searching for where he was in the story, is the specific behavioral signal the research identified as most reliably associated with early working memory strain. Real implication: narrative coherence, the measurable ability to tell a structured story from beginning to end, declined significantly in research participants 12 to 18 months before any formal cognitive diagnosis was made. It is one of the most sensitive early linguistic markers in the study. Pattern 4. Repeating the same information within a single conversation. This is one of the most recognized warning signs and also one of the most commonly misread, because there is a meaningful difference between repeating yourself across different conversations, which is generally about long-term memory storage and retrieval, and repeating yourself within a single conversation, which is specifically about working memory. When you share the same piece of information twice in the same sitting, not because you forgot the person was there, but because the conversational context you built just minutes ago has not stayed accessible, this reflects a specific working memory deficit that is distinct from general forgetfulness. For beginners, the key distinction is context. If someone repeats a piece of information they shared 3 days ago, that is long-term memory. If they share it again within the same conversation 20 minutes later, that is working memory. And working memory decline is the more specific and more meaningful early signal. For families, gently noting the repetition in a warm and non-shaming way, rather than ignoring it or overreacting, allows you to track whether it is an isolated occurrence or a developing pattern. The pattern across weeks and months matters far more than any single instance. Real implication: within conversation, repetition was one of the most consistent early behavioral markers in a large longitudinal dementia study. It predicted formal diagnosis significantly earlier than memory testing in the same cohort. Now, I want to ask you my second question for the comments, and I genuinely want your answer. This is important to me as I plan upcoming content for this community. Out of the 4 patterns we have covered, increased filler words, mid-sentence word searching, losing the narrative thread, within conversation repetition, which one do you recognize most? In yourself or in someone you love? You can just tell me the number: 1, 2, 3, or 4. Because your answers guide where I go next, and I read every comment on this channel. Now, pattern 5. And here is the one that showed the strongest predictive association with early cognitive decline in the research. The one I told you was not what you expect. It is the reduction in conversational complexity, not pauses, not repetition, not word finding. The gradual, almost invisible shift away from complex sentence structures towards simpler ones. Shorter sentences, fewer embedded clauses, less nuanced expression. The quiet simplification of how a person communicates over time. Here is why this is so powerful as an early signal. Complex sentence construction is one of the most executive function-intensive things the brain does in normal daily life. To build a sentence with multiple clauses, to say, "I was going to call you after I finished the report, but then my daughter rang and it completely slipped my mind," requires holding multiple pieces of information simultaneously in working memory, sequencing them correctly, and managing the grammatical architecture of the whole thing in real time. As executive function begins to show early strain, the brain compensates. It does not stop communicating. It does not go silent. It simplifies. Unconsciously, gradually, across months and years. The long, nuanced sentences become shorter. The embedded clauses disappear. The richness of expression quietly reduces. The people closest to the person almost never notice it consciously, because the person is still talking, still present, still themselves in most ways. But researchers who analyzed transcripts of conversations over years found this pattern to be among the earliest and most consistent linguistic markers preceding formal dementia diagnosis. It is not dramatic. It does not feel like a symptom. It feels like the person is just being more direct, more concise, more to the point. And in a culture that values simplicity in communication, it can go completely unnoticed for years. Now let me close the loop and come back to Patricia and Robert. When my colleague conducted Robert's detailed linguistic assessment, the finding that stood out most was not the word-finding pauses Patricia had noticed. It was the pattern in Robert's speech transcripts that he himself was completely unaware of. His average sentence length had shortened measurably over audio recordings Patricia had unknowingly provided, hours of home videos from family events over the previous 4 years. His use of subordinate clauses had declined by nearly 40%. He was not aware of it. Patricia had not consciously identified it as a pattern, but it was there, consistent, measurable, and it had been signaling for years before the word-finding pauses she noticed brought them to my office. The intervention we put in place for Robert was built around what the research supports. Daily linguistic exercise, complex reading followed by summarization in his own words, forcing the prefrontal cortex to rebuild and maintain the working memory infrastructure for narrative structure. Daily aerobic exercise, because the research on cerebral blood flow and executive function is unambiguous, that movement is one of the most potent cognitive protections available to seniors. A dietary protocol built around anti-inflammatory and neuroprotective foods, and structured social conversation, specifically conversations requiring him to tell stories, explain complex ideas, and use his full linguistic range rather than defaulting to simple exchanges. 2 years later, Robert's follow-up linguistic analysis showed stabilization of the markers that had been declining, not reversal in every area, Stabilisation, which, in the context of the trajectory he was on, is a deeply meaningful outcome. Here are the 3 things I want you to carry from this video. Speech patterns reveal executive function changes earlier than almost any standard test. Increased filler words, mid-sentence pauses on common verbs, losing the thread of familiar stories, within conversation repetition, and the gradual simplification of sentence complexity are the 5 patterns the research identifies as most meaningful. They are subtle, they are consistent, and they appear years before clinical diagnosis. Noticing them early gives you years of intervention opportunity, years of doing the things, aerobic exercise, neuroprotective diet, cognitive training, social engagement, that the research shows can slow and in some cases stabilize the underlying changes that speech is measuring. And pay attention to the people you love. Patricia's careful observation gave Robert years he might otherwise have lost. Warm, loving attention to how someone you care about is speaking is one of the most valuable things you can offer them. Not surveillance, love. The people in this community are the ones who take this seriously. They are the ones who do not wait for a crisis to act. They are the ones who share a video like this with a spouse or a sibling, not to alarm them, but to love them with information. If that is you, and I believe it is, then this channel was built for you. Subscribe so you do not miss what is coming. Next week, I am covering the specific daily exercise protocol that the neuroscience research identifies as most effective for protecting and rebuilding executive function in adults over 65. Not general fitness advice. The specific type, duration, and frequency that produces measurable cognitive benefit in the same brain systems that speech patterns are measuring. And the week after that, I am going into the dietary protocol most directly protective of the prefrontal cortex, the brain region at the center of everything we discussed today. The research on this is specific enough that we can talk about meals, not just food categories, actual meals, structured around what the aging prefrontal cortex needs most. Subscribe so you are here for both. Take care of yourself. Take care of the people you love. And I will see you in the next one.